National Bank and also regulating National Bank, having majority shares in First Women's Bank and these number of other financial, it is inconsistent. So I think the ownership function should be separated and should not be in the central bank. So the plan that we have proposed, the task force and the committee, is this. In the first phase, we are proposing that corporate governance regulations draft for PSCs already issued by ICCP be finalized and effectively enforced. Now my deadline was, and believe you me, we were given this task and the expectation was that we'll take 6 months to finalize this code. I think we did it in a month, Fida Sahab? 2 months, but I think in just 2 meetings, I think. So we were able to, we have finalized the draft. We are proposing 2 more roundtables, and my plan was when we presented this to the finance minister in the roundtable, my suggestion to him was that this should be part of his budget speech. We should finalize this code by that time. We are still trying to persuade SECP to take that responsibility and ownership of regulation so that, this is in place. I know this will not solve all the problems, but it can solve a number of problems, and it will be a great step in the right direction. And if we are able to do it, the cabinet can approve such requirements for SOEs that are not, because this code at the moment will apply to all companies, the state sector or public sector companies. Almost 85–90% of the public sector entities are companies, so we'll take care of most of the companies like steel mills and several companies. But there are a number of organizations which are statutory organizations like PIAC, like railways, which is not even an organization, it's a department. So cabinet decision will be required. Use of fit and proper criteria for appointments of directors and CEO, very, very critical to the success of these reforms, and we require commitment at the highest level. CEO appointment and accountable to the board, very important reform which is required. So these are what we are expecting in the first phase. In the second phase, we are proposing that there should be a standalone law for SOEs with appropriate governance structure for implementation, because you see the code and regulations by SOE may be a problem. Unless you have something, the force of the law, it is difficult to implement, and especially for entities that are not companies, just administrative requirements may be difficult to enforce. Then I think in the second phase, my proposal, and I think the committee agrees with me, is that we should have a comprehensive administrative and legal framework for nomination, appointment, empowerment, accountability and remuneration of directors of SOEs. Ideally, as I said, maybe in the third phase we should have something like Temasek. But before we reach there, at least we should have, the key reform is really appointing the right board members and empowering the board. Authorizing the board and then holding the board accountable also. That's the crux. Empowering the board to appoint the CEO and perform the functions, holding it accountable. So how can that happen? We can develop a database of board members and directors, people who have certified courses from PICG, ICAP can help develop a database, other institutions. Then at least what can happen is that it may be difficult to take away the powers of the line ministry totally. So at least there may be like economic reforms unit, there may be a committee or a commission there which develops, shortlists or develops a list of people who can be appointed in different sectors. And then the line ministry should select from those people, so that the shortlisting and screening process is done by the one professional organization, and then maybe from a short list of 10 people, they can select 7 or 6, by the line ministry or by the administrative, so that they are not totally left alone. That may be a more pragmatic way of implementing reforms in Pakistan, rather than saying that no, we will have Temasek. Ideally, yes, but I think maybe we are not there. It may take longer. So these are, ladies and gentlemen, my suggestions and recommendations of the committee. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, SSAP, for the elaborate presentation on the requirements, key requirements of the code. Now the floor is open for the question answer session. Please state your name, be brief.
Allow me to say that Asad Ali Shah showed his slide on this debt to GDP ratio. And there were 7 countries which were in negative. And after the 6 countries, he went to Pakistan. But at the bottom, there was a country called New Zealand, and it wasn't positive. Since I represent New Zealand and Pakistan for the last 20 years, I like to just narrate one example to you. In 2005, when President Musharraf paid a state visit to New Zealand, it was on Sunday that the New Zealand Prime Minister invited him and the entourage to a lunch on boat. President and his delegation, because of the security protocol given to them, arrived at the venue at 12:25 p.m. The time for the lunch was 12:30. The New Zealand Prime Minister came in driving herself and reached there at 12:28. She went onto the board and apologized to the President. So President Musharraf said, "No, Madam Prime Minister, you're on time, we were early. Don't you have a driver?" And she said, "Mr. President, he had a family commitment. Today is Sunday, I gave him a day off." So the governance and the loyalty comes from the top. And that's where you see the New Zealand, and I'm sure Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, when at the ADB, she has met so many New Zealanders who are occupying high position in world over. That's the commitment that we are talking, and that's why the country is in positive. And unfortunately, the moral fiber, integrity and dishonesty are the main factors where we find that these SOEs are bleeding. And today, if we say that the bad news is that we are discussing this subject when we have incurred over the last 5 years in excess of $10 billion of losses. But the good news is that still we are here to discuss this subject, and we hope if we get the first phase through, as Asad Ali Shah said, in this government, maybe the second phase will come in the next government. Gentlemen, ladies, identify yourself and ask your question directed to the 2 of the speakers.
Sir, my name is S.N. Mehanti, and I have a question for Mr. Syed Asad Ali Shah. The first, in the discussion, he mentioned balance sheet of various countries. My first question is, what's the source of the balance sheet that he has, indicated certain balances against asset-less liabilities? So that's my first question. My second question is that how practical he feels when he mentions, and when we have adopted new code and clearly mentions that there needs to be difference in responsibilities of chairman and chief executive. Board needs to have a different, perspective. In fact, in my case, especially, there is a difference of 30-year difference between age difference between a person who is the chief executive of the company, and if I'm on the board and other people who are on the board, and they are 30-year, the chief executive is 30-year elder than us. How could that be much practical for us to ask him, that senior person on and make him accountable for